Hello, everyone. Happy Tuesday. It is Tech Tuesday here on INE Live. We're so glad you're joining us today. I'm your host, Kathryn Brown, and today we're talking about the massive security breach within Cisco networks, and we're doing a bit of an incident postmortem review. You may have heard on May 24th, 2022, earlier this year, Cisco Security Incident Response and Cisco Talos, their cybersecurity intelligence group, detected a breach on their network. Further investigation revealed that a Cisco employee's VPN credentials were compromised through a combination of phishing and social engineering tactics. Technical details of the attack were posted on Cisco's blog, and earlier this month, images of the stolen files were posted on the dark web. So we're taking a look at that, examining it, and we have two of INE's long-standing experts here to break down exactly what happened, how and why it happened, and how we can take the lessons learned from this attack to better protect our infrastructure moving forward. First, as we do each time we stream here on INE Live, I want to let you know we are streaming live right now across social media platforms, including LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and Twitch. There we go. Be sure to like and subscribe on the social media platform you're using so you can stay in the loop when we do go live and get those notifications. We want you to get involved, talk to us, talk to others. We'd love to see that. We just posted a summary of the attack there in our chat, so you can, if you're not familiar with it, you can click that, follow along, and use it to ask some questions. Our team is monitoring chat, so if you have a comment, drop it in. If you have a question, do us a favor, put a Q at the beginning so we can find those questions easily as we're combing through the comments, and we'll get to as many as we can today. With that, I want to bring in our guests. Brian McGahan certainly needs no introduction. Co-founder of INE and Director of Networking Content, four-time CCIE, including security, world-class instructor, and mentor to thousands of IT professionals. Brian, so glad to have you here with us today.
Hi, Kathryn. Thanks for having me today. I'm really excited about today's session. As soon as I saw the posting that there was a compromise into Cisco's network, I knew immediately that we had to run one of these sessions and dive deeper into what specifically happened.
Yeah, we're excited to hear what you have to say. So thanks, Brian. Also with us here today, Jack Reedy, INE's Director of Cyber Security Content. Jack has more than 14 years of experience in the tech industry, including 10 years in cyber defensive operations. He is also a familiar face here at INE Live. So thank you, Jack, for once again being here and lending your voice.
I appreciate it. And yeah, whenever Brian sent this over to me, I was 100% on board with jumping into one of these. It's a really interesting case study.
Yeah, and it's really cool to have both of you on the show today coming in. You're, certainly experts in your own field, and then coming together to examine this incident that kind of crosses these two fields of networking and cybersecurity. So it should be a really interesting show. Glad to have both of you here. So Jack, I want to start with you. The article in question states that, as I said a moment ago, May of 2022, Cisco Security Incident Response Team, or CSIRT, is that how we say this? Is that how we say it?
Yeah.
CSIRT, all right, good, was alerted to the compromise. It began taking action with Cisco Talos. First off, let's just dive into what is a security incident response team, what do they do, and then tell us a little about Cisco Talos. Those are two of the words that we're going to be using a lot today.
Yeah, so a CSIRT, bit of a correction too. So CSIRT for Cisco stands actually for Cisco Security Incident Response Team, which I thought was a nice little twist on their stuff. And specifically though, a security incident response team or cybersecurity, or however different way you chop up that acronym, basically it is the first response that you'll get in an enterprise network to identify either is this malware, has this affected the security or the baseline operations of a system, and how widespread are the effects of this, actions that the attacker took. Usually, they will first do the initial analysis, and then they will provide recommendations either for remediation or, if it's widespread, recovery operations, which can include things like, enterprise-wide password resets, reimaging of systems, as well as they can also, so CSIRTs can also work in a contractual manner where they show up on retainer to third-party companies as well to provide help and assistance as necessary. And then to pivot off that, what is Cisco Talos? So Cisco Talos is similar to that, however, they provide threat intelligence for industry-wide. So they are experts at not only providing remediation actions, but then chasing down the attackers to somewhat of a point of origin, meaning that it's called attribution, and companies don't usually have enough time or knowledge to be able to understand exactly where every attack comes from, especially when anonymization is being used. In this case, though, Talos is an expert at this. So they already have a history of understanding when and where these attacks have occurred, and they're able to do something called fingerprinting to really understand the behaviors of these attackers and then identify work that they've previously done or that they are ongoing and getting involved with.
Gotcha. All right. So, Brian, you're obviously expert over in the networking kind of corner of all of this. When you first learned about the attack, what was your reaction? Were you shocked, surprised that a company like this could be compromised to this level, or was it essentially a matter of time?
I think it's just a matter of time. I think any big company, Fortune 50, Fortune 100, is pretty much constantly under cyber attack. Excuse me. But what I thought was kind of interesting and unique about this situation is the transparency level that Cisco went through in the Cisco Talos blog posting that talks about not only how was the initial vector of the attack work, so how did the hacker get the user's credentials in the first place, and then once they were inside the network, what were the specific type of compromises that they were trying to do along the way. And like Jack said, one of the big issues with defending against this type of attack is that most companies don't really have their own resources to be able to track this information, or in like a post-mortem event, try to track it down afterwards, which is essentially what Cisco Talos is effectively designed to do. So not really surprised that Cisco is getting hacked, but I would say, yes, it's surprising that they were as effective as they were in this particular case. And then again, how much transparency Cisco put out there about the specifics of the attack.
So I want to turn it over to both of you now, just to kind of go back and forth. And if you can just explain, kind of take us through what exactly happened. I think one of you has a screen share. Jack, that may be you, but if you could take us through, because in this case, Cisco really did, they were extremely transparent, to your point, Brian. They released a ton of information, and we can use that information, and in fact, they say that they want the broader community to be using that information to change, enhance, tweak security procedures so this doesn't happen to someone else. So with that, I just want to turn it over to you two to kind of take us through exactly what happened here and how this all unfolded.
Sure, absolutely. So in this, let's see if I can make that a little better. There we go. So in this, to start this off, basically what ended up happening was a particular user, targeted through a couple different mechanisms, had their own credentials compromised for Google Chrome or Google, their own personal Google account, in which their browser had syncing turned on. So by compromising those credentials, they could log in to a Google Chrome instance and then have the same credentials. Now, if you've used Google Chrome before and you've entered a username and password somewhere, you'll get a pop-up box on occasion that says, would you like to save this for future use? In this case, this user clicked yes multiple times, and one of the credentials they saved was the Cisco VPN. So having compromised that user's personal Google account, they now had a username and password, but because Cisco is advanced and they are mature as an enterprise network, they were missing the third part, which is an MFA. So multi-factor authentication, which basically is some form of token that you have to authenticate as a user. So it's not, when we talk about authorization, there's a couple different types, and usually it's something something you are, something you have, as well as a couple different things. You can also do like something you do, which is behavior, authorization, tokenization, a couple other things. In this case, it was multi-factor because you have something that the user knows, which is the username and password, and something that they have, in which case is the phone, which a lot of us, we have, multiple devices and things like that we use some form of app to either hit a button and say, yes, this is me, and authorize, or type in a PIN code that's provided via the app. The user, and I think me and Brian can go back and forth on this because we were talking previously about the MFA attacks here. They had two different types of attacks happen. They had a social engineering attack where they would get random calls from individuals pretending to be, other companies or authorities trying to help them through something. And they would legitimately try and ask them to provide that code that was in their app. Option two is they repetitively added in, requested, is this you, multiple times from the multi-factor to the point to where they had MFA fatigue is what the attack is called. Now, with Brian, he had talked about seeing this previously. I mean, what are your thoughts on MFA? I mean, I've gotten that MFA request multiple times when I wasn't expecting it.
Yeah, Jack and I had talked about this a little bit offline, and this is the first time I've heard of this type of vector before. It's basically, the idea is like on your iPhone or whatever. It says this user is trying to log in from this location. Do you accept them? Yes or no. So most of the time, it's pretty obvious when you get one of these messages and it's not you. But unfortunately, there's no way to cancel out of these or to opt out of these. So basically, the attack is that you just keep hammering your phone over and over and over with these requests, and hopefully the person's going to accidentally click accept as opposed to deny. So it's kind of a technology trick to get around the two-factor authentication.
Yeah, absolutely. It's also another form of social engineering. Specifically, when it came to the social engineering as well with the phone calls, that's called phishing. I don't know about you, but how often do you answer your phone for a number you don't recognize?
True. Yeah, I mean, I think a big part of this too is security awareness training. That no matter how secure your technology can be, we can have the latest firewalls, intrusion prevention, antivirus and stuff like that. But if someone calls you on the phone and says, "Hey, Bob, what's your password?" and you give your password away, unfortunately, that's not going to help. With the end-to-end security at the end of the day.
Yeah, that's 100% true. But in this case, because they were able to compromise the browser, they actually the attackers did have the username and password, so they already had some form or some way to get in there, and it wasn't even the user giving it away. There was still another technical control in there that stopped them from just immediately gaining access to the VPN too. So it was really great. I think the only way that they could have improved, and they talk about this on the postmortem at the very bottom of the article that we shared out, was putting a timeout value for failed MFA attempts. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
If they had just capped it at 10 and then the account's locked out, that would have fixed this whole situation.
Yeah, or there should be like a maximum amount of push requests that you can send before it times out, something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, either or. And personally, what I would like to see is that from an instant response background is if you hit that exhaustion level and an account is locked out, then a ticket is created over at your instant response team to investigate, because usually you shouldn't have that many attempts or logouts or anything else like that. It either speaks to something being broken, because you do have APIs that can try that occur a lot. So it either speaks to something being broken, or it speaks to somebody trying to attack.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, my first thought process with this was that it was kind of a 0-day attack, at least in my opinion, because I had never heard of the MFA fatigue before. So it's like one of those things. How do you protect against the unknown? If I didn't know that this was a vector in the beginning, and I didn't know to log my MFA attempts, I think I'm adding security by doing multi-factor authentication, but potentially making it even weaker at the end of the day if it's not set up right.
So, little parallel here. It's a funny thing you mentioned. How do you know? I don't know if you knew this or not, but a lot of times in zoos, the safety precautions that they put, like the height of the railing versus the gap between the animals and the people, it's all a guesstimate. just by experience and best practices. So sometimes that's what security is. It's just a guesstimate of what situation and then quickly altering on the change and on the fly too.
That's a pretty good analogy. So wait till the animals get out, and then we realize that we have to build the fence a little bit higher.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
That legitimately, it's a watching and waiting game. And oh, that's something new. Okay, so let's adjust that. Let's adjust that. Make things better and safer for everybody to come and get involved. It's the same thing in enterprise security. Sometimes you have to just send it and see what the reactions are. I mean, when I was working at it, we used to call it a screen test. To see how long till the users yell at us for something we changed.
Nice. So let's talk a little bit about more specifics of the attack. So we're at the point now where the attacker got the user's credentials. They were able to log into the VPN. So at that point, how would Cisco even know that, if they were, let's assume they're not logging the multi-factor authentication, how would they know from that point on that it's actually an attacker and not just a regular user that's trying to get onto the network?
So one methodology that isn't that successful, but a lot of incident response teams use is regionality by IP addressing. Now, this can be beaten by going from a VPN to a node within the country that you're attacking, and then logging into another VPN through that node. So it's one that can be defeated pretty easily with a mature, a mature attacker mindset. But if you see somebody logging in via, let's say, Italy or France or whatever else, and that user is generally in America, that's a big red flag. Having been on global networks before, this is a very difficult thing to establish because, I previously I've worked in a company that had, we were in 44 countries. And we'd frequently get this flag because a developer would just take a weekend and go from, Germany to Norway, for instance, just on vacation. And the second that they logged in, or their VPN dropped out because they were VPN'd into the client network, and then the VPN dropped out, and they went back in to check their email or something like that, we would get a flag, and that happened all over the world. Another, however, instance is if you take a look at login times for the users. Now, this has become a little more difficult recently because work from home instances, people can log in anywhere, also mobile devices, so you would have to really set up your gateway and take a look at the login hours. And you could do it with behavior, with machine learning, things like that, but it would be difficult whenever the attacker acts like a user. It becomes very difficult to tell the difference between, machine versus actual user. Exception is another way would be what they're accessing. So if you have somebody that's working in finance, for example, that's all of a sudden trying to access a bunch of HR documents that they have no business, that could be a red flag. But you would need to set up monitoring for file structure, share drive structure.
So it sounds like the key is logging and really having someone full-time monitor those logs to see, when you get an alert, what's really going on.
Exactly.
Yeah, Kathryn, if we could go back to the screen share, the blog for a minute. I want to talk a little bit more about the specifics of what they had talked about in the attack here. So it says essentially that once the user was attached to the VPN, they were able to access some of the other systems internally by doing what they call as a Jack, I can't think of the word now. When you're already in the environment and you're trying to reach further within that environment, you're trying to pivot, right? So you're trying to pivot from one system to another.
Yeah, and not only did they pivot, they also used a technique called living off the land. So basically, they landed on a box, and then they started utilizing Windows tools specifically to do their reconnaissance to then pivot deeper and deeper into the network. They were able to tell that also the individuals had hands on the keyboard as they were doing it because they found a lot of the CLI, the command line interface commands. Some of them had misspellings in them, which you wouldn't see if they were just running a script remotely and sending commands via SSH or something like that. So it was really interesting that once they landed on a box, they started doing, initial reconnaissance, and then they basically grabbed as many credentials as they could as quickly as they could. And then they went deeper into the network and did a pivot from there as well. I believe they talked about they got into their Citrix servers, and then from there escalated to their Active Directory.
So it seemed that it says they were able to, let's see where it says basically, how was Talos or how was Cisco alerted to the fact that the user was trying to do something nefarious? Do you know what I mean? I'm looking for the section here that it said.
Yes. So basically, the user, once they got through the VPN, they started doing a combination of they would land on a box, they would do reconnaissance, they would establish persistence, and then they would find credentials and do their best to elevate and then pivot. So they would, grab credentials, make sure they had the right credentials. And they said the first time they did this, they reached out to as many systems as they could, got access to all of these individual systems, and then they pivoted over to them. And then they started working their way to the Active Directory. Once they got domain admin, they were able, that's whenever the CSIRT or the CERT was able to, that's when they identified them as the compromises likely occurred. Now, it's very likely that it was because of the monitoring on administrative credentials. Generally speaking, you can as a CERT monitor administrative activity. However, the volume of just pure administrative activity that goes on in an enterprise environment is insane. And every time that you elevate or escalate privileges, and sending a flag or some type of notification to, let's say, a SIM, it really does drown out a lot of alerts. So a lot of times what you'll find CERT's monitoring instead is the creation of new administrative accounts. In this case, the attacker created local admin account, I should say, called Z, with a very specific password via, I believe it was a command line, Windows command line, net user add command. With that would have sent up a really big red flag that somebody is adding local permissions and things like that, especially if the system that they are on has no need for that. So for example, if you see a local admin being added, I'll use the finance computer again. If you see somebody in finance, a CPA or something like that, adding a local user that's an administrator, that should be a massive red flag that's, send something up to your SIM immediately as an alert.
Yeah, I could see that definitely be an issue with the logging, that if you're logging too much, that it would be difficult to try to sort through it and, figure out what is even relevant to begin with. But I hadn't thought of that before. That's a really good idea, to only log the creation of a new account that's an administrator, as opposed to just, the administrators logging in. Because like you said, that could be your automation script logging into your boxes, doing, whatever normal maintenance during the day. So how could you tell that apart from, some sort of illegitimate activity?
Yeah, so, well, there's two differences here. So there's logging. I still say log the administrative actions, but alerting. So what you're going to alert on versus the logging. So you should be able to go and reference every time an administrator's taken an action. But what you should be sending to your alert console via your SIM should probably only be stuff like, hey, a new admin account's been created, because that's really easy to classify. You can just send an email over to HR. Hey, did we hire a new person? What is this admin account? You can also CC the infrastructure guys and be like, hey, did you guys add on a new admin account? If both say no, then that's an event. You need to go investigate.
Yeah, so it sounds like a combination of security awareness training and then better tools to deal with these situations.
Yeah, a lot of people would be surprised probably about the amount of data science that goes into incident response. Because you're collecting, like you said, logging. You're logging as much as you can that's relevant to the scenarios that you might find in security, and then you're trying to configure alerts based on that logging. That if the conditions equal X, Y, and Z, send me an alert notice, and then you would have, well, in this case, junior analysts go and validate, does this look like an actual attack? Does it, or did something get messed up in the alert logic? and then you would escalate to somebody else who can actually do the deep dive. And is this malware? Maybe do some reverse engineering on the malware, identify whether or not it's a compromise, and then start pulling together all the necessary resources to deal with the compromise, including legal, PR for bigger instances like this.
So one of the other aspects that Cisco had posted on this in more detail that I kind of want to cover is how they figured out who the threat actor was, or what they're calling in this case the initial access broker, or the IAB. Specifically, they gave some sort of hacking group name, and it says that they have moderate to high confidence that this attack was conducted by this particular adversary. So I guess the question is, Jack, how does a company like Cisco correlate this data to figure out that it could be this particular group versus, any other script kiddie out there on the internet that has some bots?
Yeah, so Cisco Talos is kind of the key function here because they are an intelligence driver. So they would have access to all the historic data that would allow somebody, like I described previously, fingerprint, and then determine by those fingerprints what this attacker is associated with. It looks like that they have a history of basically gaining access to an enterprise network, putting down a bunch of backdoors, a bunch of what we would call persistence. That is, a system could be restarted and the system would still, talk back to command and control servers. And they have then sold those to other, be it ransomware groups or, nation state actors, APTs, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's access as a service is what we used to call it. I'm not sure if that's still the acronym now. But it's very similar to, it's very similar to like AWS provides, infrastructure as a service. You have Microsoft providing software as a service. Legitimately, in some circles, you can just say, hey, I have access to X, Y, and Z, and it's at this level, in this case, domain admin, which is insane. I'm offering it up for this much in Bitcoin. Who's going to buy it? They also have similar services to this in reconnaissance for software vulnerabilities. So part of the issue is when a 0-day falls, right? Some brokers out there are able to say, hey, I know that this company will be affected by that 0-day. I've got this list of companies that will be affected by this 0-day. It's for sale for this amount of money. Come grab it and then start, attacking the second that the 0-day falls. Hacking as a service, bearded IT dad. Yeah, I see that.
Very interesting.
Yes. Yeah, it's hacking as a service is another form, but that's somebody doing the work for you to gain like the actual attack post access. So there's different stages and different ways that you can do that as well.
Okay, I want to go to an audience question we have here. There was a question about monitoring of the VPN alerts. That the question was, there was an increase in bandwidth due to exfiltration of the data. Should they not have set an alert on that? Okay, so the basic idea is that the user was able to get compromised. They had some sort of data they were trying to grab, and they were downloading this. So the question is, why wasn't the system able to figure out, that they're not supposed to download those files, for example?
I didn't see anything where they actually exfiltrated data outside of credentials. I mean, they dumped a couple databases, but, if you're talking just a, a semicolon delimited CSV file, that's going to be only a couple megs. It would not peak for a data stream IO as far as bandwidth utilization unless you're dumping the entire share drive for some reason or something like that. Keep in mind that on a day-to-day basis, let's say the marketing team can upload and download videos and images of the gigabyte upon gigabyte upon gigabyte. Now, you can set up monitoring, and I've done this before, set up monitoring and alerts for, top talkers, or do a once a week top talkers review for the bandwidth utilization. But a lot of times what you'll find is it's either marketing team or DevOps, where the marketing team is doing something with high resolution, high imagery, versus DevOps doing something with API calls and data migration, things like that. Not to say that it's useless, right? However, what I prefer to monitor is the changeover week per data utilization. So specifically by user, how much data did they do this week per the next week? And if it explodes over, let's say, a 30% threshold, then I'll investigate that as opposed to just the top talker.
So some sort of like abnormalities in their normal patterns is what you're looking for, right?
Yeah, I believe it's Malcolm Gladwell has a great book called Outliers, however you pronounce it, that discusses, pattern observation as well as finding the unique parts of patterns that lie outside of what you would find in the mean or the mode of the statistical, so statistical anomalies, things like that. Excellent methodology. I even have a book up here called Statistical Analysis of Network Data. And it also talks about it. Basically, you can actually use math as a security analyst to identify periods that just don't make sense and then start your investigations with that in order to find these oddities that are subverting your security controls.
Sorry, I'm looking for another customer question here.
So while you're looking, Brian, let me just jump in there. InfoSec Brett raised this question, and it got me thinking. Just surprised the end user didn't raise up the odd MFA requests, and that kind of got me thinking. So, what is the responsibility on the individual employee in this case to monitor security concerns and raise those questions, particularly among employees who maybe are not tech savvy? We hear Cisco. This is a tech company, right? But there are lots of departments there, just like there are at I&E. And I don't want to pick on any of the departments, but there's HR, there's finance, there's event planning, there's public relations, there's marketing, and depending on those different departments, I mean those departments, people within them generally have a different set of expertise, right? So what is the responsibility on employees, company-wide, really regardless of what company we're talking about, to monitor these security concerns and then raise those concerns to management?
Well,
Yeah.
I would say, oh, go ahead, Brian, if you want.
Yeah, I was just going to say real quick, your security is only as good as your weakest link. So we can have all the technical tools at our disposal that are trying to, automate the system and take analysis and figure out if someone is trying to hack it. But, if the hack is as easy as getting someone's username and password because they're not, having good password strength, configured, then this is a different issue that we need to talk about in terms of just a security awareness of, don't open emails from people that you don't know, or don't answer your phone, don't return voicemails from, it sounds like the boss is calling you, but asking for your password. So it's more of a people training issue, I would say, than a technology issue per se.
I'd agree with that. On top of that, Bearded IT Dad makes a really great point. Many employees don't want to report because they don't want to get in trouble for being compromised. And that's a really fair statement. I would say that, this was on the individual user. They really should have brought up this odd behavior, if anything, just to fix it from an IT perspective. Like, why am I getting, this is exhausting. Why am I getting this many alerts? Did something break? Like, I shouldn't get this. And they might have done that too. There might have been a miscommunication between the IT team and the security team, where IT team was like, not quite sure, let me get to that eventually. Because IT teams, just like security teams, they get exhausted too and inundated with requests. And if this is just an odd user behavior as opposed to, critical systems failure, it's going to be prioritized in a different way, right? So by the time this attack might have actually hit the security team's radar, the IT team might not have had a chance to look at it. But either way, I disagree with the idea that we need to punish users for security practices, because you would get exactly what Bearded IT Dad was talking about, which is the fear of retaliation. It should be a comprehensive program that is there to support the users towards the end goal of making the company more secure. Otherwise, you get this where the end user doesn't want to talk, doesn't want to speak, and if you can't analyze what you don't know about, right? So if the end user isn't actually reporting the symptoms of the illness, if you will, then how are you supposed to start providing the fix actions or the antibiotics, if you will?
Jack, you mentioned earlier that the way that this compromise really originated was the employee synced Google Chrome accounts. I think it's probably fair to say a lot of people use different accounts on the same computer, and probably a lot of people sync those Google accounts, those Chrome accounts. Should people not be doing that, or is there a particular red flag that people should be on the lookout for in terms of, okay, sync this, but don't sync that?
Yeah, so just like the way that you handle data or projects in a business, you should also handle your credentials. I would never sync my VPN credentials to a browser session. However, if I have, a game that I play via browser, then I'll sync those credentials, because if they compromise that, yeah, you have access to my game profile. Okay. It's one of those things where you have to adjust your daily life to, make things easy for yourself within reason. MFA is an extra step to your authentication process, yes, but what are you protecting? Access to your company? Then it makes perfect sense. Access to your banking? That makes a lot of sense. If you're a streamer and your business is going on Twitch or YouTube and doing exactly what we're doing now, going live, talking to people. For example, if you are Jacksepticeye, Markiplier, or one of the other big YouTube names, Linus Tech Tips, if you're any of those individuals and you're going live on YouTube, then yeah, you should probably have MFA turned on for YouTube, because that is that's your business. Versus, are you just going, are you going to go read a comic on a website in the browser? Save those credentials. I think that there is a level of security and trust that comes with each software, and as an individual, it's your responsibility to dictate what needs to be much more secure versus what doesn't. In this case, I wouldn't have saved my credentials to the browser. Personally, I would have used a password manager. On top of that, I would also argue that Cisco should have a expiration policy. And I don't know if they do or don't, because this attack might have happened so fast the expiration policy wouldn't have occurred. But it should have occurred. Usually 90 days to 120 days is pretty much the industry standard where you change your password up.
So, Jack, going along with that, you had mentioned password managers. Do you think in this situation that would have maybe helped at all, or what's the main idea of why would having a password manager make it more secure than using Google Chrome as management, for example?
So a password manager specifically would be a third-party application that only deals with the password management, as opposed to Google Chrome that does all these other options and also has a password manager built into it. So you have one company that's specifically focused on their bread and butter is keeping your passwords safe, versus another company that has, we can store your passwords and your information, as well as make sure that Google has a good browsing, UI, UX, everything else like that. Like, it's not the primary focus of Google. In that as well, the user kind of messed up because they didn't have an MFA turned on for their password manager that was tied to their browser. So it doesn't matter if they had, a password manager saved to their browser without the MFA turned on, just username and password got access to the first layer. And then, they needed the VPN access because those credentials were stored in there, and they used resource exhaustion to get there as well. They basically kind of did a privilege escalation ladder where it only hinged on one MFA response.
So that makes me wonder, let's assume that I am able to get into your account that you're synchronizing the passwords. Are they stored just in clear text that I'm able to read them then, or?
No, they aren't stored in clear text, but I do believe that they can, that you can access the chain with a username and password. So if you know the original username and password, you can then access the chain. don't hold my feet to the fire on this, but I also don't believe that there is an exhaustion value for trying username and password attempts against the Google Chrome browser. I don't recall there being one, having used it previously. Again, I might be wrong there, but if that's the case, that means that with a good enough word list, they can just try,
Brute
find
force.
your chain, and then have all of the username and passwords in plain text.
Hmm. So basically, it sounds like we need multiple levels of security regardless. That passwords aren't enough, your token isn't enough. There's got to be some combination. Plus, to make sure that someone is not trying to steal those piece of information through some sort of social engineering vector.
Yeah, so I prefer to think of it as being a hermit a little bit. I don't click on links that are sent to me in email. Just don't. If I have alerts that pop up regarding services, I log in directly into the service and then I go and I check messages or notifications in that service. So, for example, I get a banking email that says, hey, X, Y, and Z, your account has been overdraft, or you have pending money, or whatever the notification is. Um, I would log in directly to my bank by going to the bank's website through the URL I put in at the address bar, and then log in via that way using MFA. And then I would go to the notifications page and I would check. Same with Amazon, same with whatever service you want to talk about that might get an email about, some type of billing issue. So I never click on a link in an email address unless I have specifically asked for it from the third party. Like, hey, can you send me that link? Hey, can you send me that attachment? And I'm expecting that attachment to come in. Option 2 as well. If I don't recognize the number, I generally don't pick up and I'll Google it first. Because I'm a cybersecurity professional. There's plenty of reasons why people would want to compromise me. And I get too many spam and scam and phishing calls on a daily basis that there's just no point anymore. If you know me, you know my number, I'll talk to you and I've got you saved in my contacts.
Right.
There's
Jack, that doesn't explain.
contact-
Wait. Is that why you never pick up my calls?
No, I have you saved in my contacts and I do pick up your calls.
I'm kidding.
I was thinking though, Jack,
Go
that there is kind of another way to defeat that, like you said, with the emails, that if you're getting a phone call from, your tech support, whoever's calling you, just ask for their phone number and then you'll give them a call back. Or, look up the...
Yeah, that is a great verification method. That's one we used in the government all the time as well is, hey, call this number, put in this extension code to get my extension here at this line. And then you'll get an extension directly to their desk and you pick it back up and like, yes, it's me. Okay, cool. Like calling somebody back is definitely a verification method. I'll tell you a good example was I was once a subcontractor with a company. I had been doing all of my back and forth with the recruiter and the contract manager on one particular domain from the company that I was doing the work with. All of a sudden, I'm waiting on a contract to come to me to sign off and start my work. And it comes from a completely different domain, email address, and somebody I don't recognize. So I just forwarded it over to the contract manager and the recruiter and said, hey, can you verify the authenticity of this? Because I wouldn't be worth my salt and worth signing this contract if I didn't ask, right? I don't recognize this domain. I don't know what this company is that, just sent me over this contract to sign. Before I click on this, before I get engaged with this, do you know this person? They're like, yeah, we're in the middle of switching over some IT infrastructure. That's an old domain we used to use. This is authentic and legitimate, but thanks for asking.
Yeah, so I think it sounds like you just have to be really vigilant all the time about just your security behavior, right?
I think that's fair. I mean, look at the ubiquity of, internet connected devices in our day-to-day lives now. I think that it's real. I mean, to this day, I still look over my shoulder whenever I merge lanes in a vehicle, right? I'm being aware of my surroundings. You should be just the same as, aware of your surroundings on the internet too. Don't click on links in your email and, set up MFA if it's important to you and can really damage you if somebody was like, as you set up an account, you should ask what information is going to be there and will this hurt? If it does, turn on MFA.
Also, I heard another one recently that was kind of interesting. For security questions, you're supposed to give fake answers to security questions.
I've heard of that one before, and it does or it doesn't. I'm also a little bit pessimistic because I believe that if you get targeted by a top tier attacker, like security questions and how good your password is and things like that, it's going to be really challenging to set something up that they're not going to get past. So I tend to go more with the idea of, hey, let's focus on the automation stuff. If somebody dumps my password out, for example, for Google, let's say Google had this horrendous breach and lost all the passwords, and somebody was able to get in my email account, right? I'm trying to make sure that my stuff is protected well enough that the automation isn't going to work. I'm not so worried about targeting, and I'm just more worried about not pissing off people that could target me. Right? It's I mean, and you work in this field, you know what I'm talking about. Like, be respectful. Like, um, and yeah, because with a targeted attack, you've got some individuals that know more than the companies that have built the software, because they've just been researching it for so long for vulnerabilities and things like that. Like, there's just some things that you can't protect against, and that's fine. It's more like going swimming and planning for a shark attack. You know what I mean? Like, nobody keeps shark repellent on them. Nobody. You know what I mean? But shark attacks happen, gator attacks happen, animal attacks happen. But it's such a small magnitude of what actually occurs on a day-to-day basis that you basically are just more so focused on how to swim because that's the actual bigger threat, right? So just try and avoid the automated attacks and not, aggravate the shark in the water, if you will.
But we're getting kind of close to the time here, but before we wrap this up, I wanted to ask both of you, or each of you, just individually, coming at it from, as we've talked about, two different disciplines of cybersecurity and networking, what are your two big takeaways from this attack? I mean, the two big things that you're like, okay, this is what we walk away with this from this with. Brian, what are your two big ones?
I think the big issue is that no matter how good your technology solution is, like I said, your security is only as good as your weakest link. So you have to make sure that your employees, your customers, whoever's accessing your systems, that they're properly trained, that they know, not to answer those phone calls or reply to those emails. Or when something like that does happen, who do you get in touch with internally? And like Jack was saying, we don't want to have some sort of case where the employee's afraid to say, hey, my account got compromised. We want to be in an environment where essentially we're using this as a learning tool that, hey, look what happened, how do we prevent this again in the future, as opposed to punishing somebody for, having their account be compromised.
Jack, what are your two big ones?
I would agree that, postmortem on this was really excellent from Cisco. I also want to applaud them from a communication standpoint. From point of compromise to public release was 78 days. And that is really impressive. It really goes to show that they are, quote unquote, eating their own dog food here, where they are, not just a service provider or a device provider, but they're also like, hey, this is what we offer as far as services. Look, it happened to us. Take a look at this report, and the report that was written is top notch. It looks amazing. Bigger takeaway as far as remediation actions, I think there's a lot of indicators of compromise at the end of the report. There are a lot of recommended remediations. I think they hit the nail on the head. Authentication failure limits on the multi-factor authentication would have saved this. Better network segmentation. It's a little insane that they, were able to add on one part we didn't talk about is they were able to authenticate multiple devices after they were able to compromise the MFA. They were able to add on multiple devices as well. So there's a couple of remediation points at the end of the report I really encourage the community to go take a look at and read through. I've been part of bigger organizations like this. I've worked these types of compromises before. I think the way that they're doing the reporting is excellent. The communication is excellent, And I highly, highly recommend everybody take a look at the report and go back. And the biggest takeaway, like I said, is great communication. And, it looks like that they had great user support there too. It doesn't look like they were shaming the user. The verbiage that's being used in the report was excellent, non-identifying, and non-victim blaming either. So that's also very good.
Awesome. All right. Great stream today. I think a ton of knowledge. Thank you guys both for being here and sharing just kind of your perspective, your context. I think we all learned a lot more about this. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathryn.
Thank you. Really glad to be here.
All right. No, we'll see you guys back for sure on INE Live very, very soon. Thanks also to the audience for watching. That is going to wrap up today's stream. If you missed this live, you can look for the replay across our social media channels and on the INE website. Be sure to like and subscribe on the social platform you're using so you can stay in the loop for details on our next stream and get those notifications when we do go live. Before we head out, I want to mention we are running an awesome promo right now. Premium subscription for $4.99, Premium Plus subscription for $6.99, Pen Tester Academy for $1.99. We've got those promo codes on our website, ine.com. It runs now through the 31st, so you're running out of time, but go grab that. Wanted to just flag that real quick. We'll see you next time. Until then, have a great week.